Falling, yes I'm falling, and she keeps calling me back again. But now I've got it, the word is good, spread the word and you'll be free.
The Beatles were an English rock band, formed in Liverpool in 1960, with members John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison and Ringo Starr. They became widely regarded as the foremost and most influential act of the rock era. Rooted in skiffle, beat, and 1950s rock and roll, the Beatles later experimented with several genres, ranging from pop ballads and Indian music to psychedelia and hard rock, often incorporating classical elements in innovative ways. In the early 1960s, their enormous popularity first emerged as Beatlemania, but as the group's music grew in sophistication, led by primary songwriters Lennon and McCartney, they came to be perceived as an embodiment of the ideals shared by the counterculture of the 1960s. In March 1957, John Lennon, then aged 16, formed a skiffle group with several friends from Quarry Bank School. They briefly called themselves the Blackjacks, before changing their name to the Quarrymen after discovering that a respected local group was already using the other name. 15-year-old Paul McCartney joined as a rhythm guitarist shortly after he and Lennon met that July. In February 1958, McCartney invited his friend George Harrison to watch the band. The 14-year-old auditioned for Lennon, impressing him with his playing, but Lennon initially thought Harrison was too young to join them. After a month of Harrison's persistence, they enlisted him as their lead guitarist. By January 1959, Lennon's Quarry Bank friends had left the group, and he began studies at the Liverpool College of Art. The three guitarists, billing themselves at least 3 times as Johnny and the Moondogs, were playing rock and roll whenever they could find a drummer. Lennon's art school friend Stuart Sutcliffe, who had recently sold one of his paintings and was persuaded to purchase a bass guitar, joined in January 1960, and it was he who suggested changing the band's name to Beatles, as a tribute to Buddy Holly and the Crickets. They used the name until May, when they became the Silver Beatles, before undertaking a brief tour of Scotland as the backing group for pop singer and fellow Liverpudlian Johnny Gentle. By early July, they had changed their name to the Silver Beatles, and by the middle of August to the Beatles. Alan Williams, the Beatles' unofficial manager, arranged a residency for them in Hamburg, but lacking a full-time drummer they auditioned and hired Pete Best in mid-August 1960. The band, now a 5-piece, left 4 days later, contracted to club owner Bruno Kostmeyer for what would be a 3.5-month residency. Kostmeyer had converted a couple of strip clubs in the district into music venues, and he initially placed the Beatles at the Indra Club. After closing the Indra due to noise complaints, he moved them to the Kaiser Keller in October. When he learned they had been performing at a rival top 10 club in breach of their contract, he gave the band 1 month's termination notice, and reportedly underaged Harrison, who had obtained permission to stay in Hamburg by lying to the German authorities about his age. The authorities arranged for Harrison's deportation in late November. 1 week later, Kostmeyer had McCartney and Best arrested for arson after they set fire to a condom in a concrete corridor. The authorities deported them. Lennon returned to Liverpool in early December, while Sutcliffe remained in Hamburg through late February with his German fiancée Astrid Kirchherr, who took the first semi-professional photos of the Beatles. After the Beatles completed their second Hamburg residency, they enjoyed increasing popularity in Liverpool with the growing Mercy Beat movement. However, 3 months later, producer George Martin signed the Beatles to EMI's Parlophone label. In December 1962, the Beatles concluded their 5th and final Hamburg residency. By 1963, they had agreed that all 4 band members would contribute vocals to their albums, including Starr, despite his restricted vocal range, to validate his standing in the group. Lennon and McCartney had established a songwriting partnership, and as the band's success grew, their dominant collaboration limited Harrison's opportunities as a lead vocalist. After the moderate success of Love Me Do, the single Please Please Me met with a more emphatic reception. Released in January 1963, 2 months ahead of the album of the same name, the song reached number 1 on every chart in London except Record Retailer, where it stalled at number 2. Released in March 1963, the album initiated a run during which 11 of their 12 studio albums released in the United Kingdom through 1970 reached number 1. The band's third single, From Me to You, came out in April and was also a chart-topping hit, starting an almost unbroken string of 17 British number 1 singles for the Beatles, including all but one of the 18 they released over the next 6 years. Issued in August, the band's fourth single, She Loves You, achieved the fastest sales of any record in the UK up to that time, selling 750,000 copies in under 4 weeks. It became their first single to sell 1 million copies, and remained the biggest-selling record in the UK until 1978, when Mulliganter, by McCartney's post-Beatles band Wings, surpassed it in sales. Their commercial success brought increased media exposure, to which the Beatles responded with an irreverent and comical attitude that defied the expectations of pop musicians at the time, inspiring even more interest. The band toured the UK 3 times in the first half of the year, a 4-week tour that began in February, the Beatles' first nationwide, preceded 3-week tours in March and May-June. As their popularity spread, a frenzied adulation of the group took hold. Greeted with riotous enthusiasm by screaming fans, the press dubbed the phenomenon Beatlemania. Although not billed as tour leaders, the Beatles overshadowed American acts Tommy Roe and Chris Montez during the February engagements and assumed top billing by audience demand, something no British act had previously accomplished while touring with artists from the US. Please Please Me maintained the top position on the record retailer chart for 30 weeks, only to be displaced by its follow-up, with the Beatles, the release of which might delay until sales of Please Please Me had subsided. Recorded between July and October, with the Beatles made better use of studio production techniques than its predecessor. It held the top spot for 21 weeks with a chart life of 40 weeks. On 7 February 1964, the Beatles left the United Kingdom with an estimated 4,000 fans gathered at Heathrow, waving and screaming as the aircraft took off. Upon landing at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport, an uproarious crowd estimated at 3,000 greeted them. During the week of 4 April 1964, the Beatles held 12 positions on the Billboard Hot 100 Singles chart, including the top 5. Touring internationally in June and July, the Beatles staged 37 shows over 27 days in Denmark, the Netherlands, Hong Kong, Australia and New Zealand. In August they returned to the US, with a 3-0 concert tour of 23 cities. Generating intense interest once again, the month-long tour attracted between 10,000 and 20,000 fans to each 30-minute performance in cities from San Francisco to New York. In early 1965, while they were his guests for dinner, Lennon and Harrison's dentist secretly added LSD to their coffee. The group's Stardust tour opened with a performance before a world record crowd of 55,600 at New York's Shea Stadium on 15 August 1965, perhaps the most famous of all Beatles concerts, in Louison's description. A further 9 successful concerts followed in other American cities. At a show in Atlanta, the Beatles gave one of the first live performances ever to make use of a foldback system of on-stage monitor speakers. Towards the end of the tour, they were granted an audience with Elvis Presley, a foundational musical influence on the band, who invited them to his home in Beverly Hills. September saw the launch of an American Saturday morning cartoon series, The Beatles, that echoed A Hard Day's Night slapstick antics over its 2-year original run. The series was a historical milestone as the first weekly television series to feature animated versions of real, living people. As preparations were made for the US tour, the Beatles knew that their music would hardly be heard. Having originally used Vox AC30 amplifiers, they later acquired more powerful 100-watt amplifiers, specially designed by Vox for them as they moved into larger venues in 1964, but these were still inadequate. Struggling to compete with the volume of sound generated by screaming fans, the band had grown increasingly bored with the routine of performing live. Recognizing that their shows were no longer about the music, they decided to make the August tour their last. Freed from the burden of touring, the Beatles embraced an increasingly experimental approach as they recorded Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, beginning in late November 1966. On 25 June 1967, the Beatles performed their forthcoming single, All You Need Is Love, to an estimated 350 million viewers on our world, the first live global television link. His death left the group disoriented and fearful about the future. The trouble between members continues to increase in relation to the issue when seeking financial advisor, a crucial job after Epstein no longer managed the group. The completion and mixing of I Want You, She's So Heavy on 20 August 1969 was the last occasion on which all four Beatles were together in the same studio. Lennon announced his departure to the rest of the group on 20 September, but agreed to withhold a public announcement to avoid undermining sales of the forthcoming album. Legal disputes continued long after their breakup, and the dissolution was not formalized until 29 December 1974. After their breakup in 1970, they each enjoyed successful musical careers of varying lengths. McCartney and Starr, the surviving members, remain musically active. Lennon was shot and killed in December 1980, and Harrison died of lung cancer in November 2001. The band's earliest influences include Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, Little Richard and Chuck Berry. During the Beatles' Colorado residency with Little Richard at the Star Club in Hamburg, from April to May 1962, he advised them on the proper technique for performing his songs. Other early influences include Buddy Holly, Eddie Cochran, Roy Orbison and the Everly Brothers. The Beatles continued to absorb influences long after their initial success, often finding new musical and lyrical avenues by listening to their contemporaries, including Bob Dylan, Frank Zappa, The Lovin' Spoonful, The Byrds and the Beach Boys, whose 1966 album Pet Sounds amazed and inspired McCartney. In 1966, Lennon named the Beach Boys' Brian Wilson the musical person he most admired. Martin later stated, "No one made a greater impact on the Beatles than Brian." Ravi Shankar, with whom Harrison studied for 6 weeks in India in late 1966, had a significant effect on his musical development during the band's later years. In 1965, Queen Elizabeth II appointed Lennon, McCartney, Harrison and Starr members of the Order of the British Empire, B. The film Let It Be, 1970, won the 1971 Academy Award for Best Original Song Score. The recipients of 7 Grammy Awards and 15 Ivor Novello Awards, the Beatles have been awarded 6 Diamond Albums, as well as 24 multi-platinum albums, 39 platinum albums and 45 gold albums in the United States. In the UK, the Beatles have 4 multi-platinum albums, 4 platinum albums, 8 gold albums and 1 silver album. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988. The best-selling band in history, the Beatles have sold between 600 million and, at MI estimates, over 1 billion units worldwide. They have had more number 1 albums on the British charts, 15, and sold more singles in the UK, 21.9 million, than any other act. In 2004, Rolling Stone ranked the Beatles as the best artist of all time. They ranked number 1 on Billboard magazine's list of the all-time most successful Hot 100 artists, released in 2008 to celebrate the US Singles Chart's 50th anniversary. As of 2014, they hold the record for most number 1 hits on the Billboard Hot 100, with 20. The Recording Industry Association of America certifies that the Beatles have sold 178 million units in the US, more than any other artist. They were collectively included in Time magazine's compilation of the 20th century's 100 most influential people. In 2014, they received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award.